Hi, everyone. Welcome to Office Hours. If you are watching on YouTube and you want to be part of the conversation, all you got to do is click on the little link below, and it'll take you to Zoom, where you can click on the link below and take you to Makana, and you can ask questions and chat there. If you think you can answer the questions, come in early. You need to be here by 6:40 Pacific Standard Time to join the panel, and we'd love to have you. If you're not sure if you're ready for this, then come in at 6. We open the doors at 6, and it'd be great to have you just come in. You can test your system. We have people who just come and hang out from 6 to 6:30 or 6 to 6:40, and then leave when we start to actually do the show. You're more than welcome to do that as well. So come on in early and hang out with us. The main process starts at 7. We do questions. Any questions that you have around media production or virtual production are opened. So 7 to 8. 8 o'clock, we usually talk about something specific. Today, we're going to be talking about how your environment affects your audio. So Tuesdays are typically our audio days, and we're going to talk a little bit about sound treatment and what makes a difference there. So that'll be our second hour. Yeah, if it's if you're going to ask those questions, make sure to tag them as second hour. So if you have environmental questions, not environmental questions, we don't talk about the environment here. I mean, we care about it and everything. It's not the subject. It's not our core subject matter. But if you want to talk about how environment affects your audio, then you can have it. I don't know how global warming would really affect audio, but it might over time. But we'd have to talk about that. Anyway, make sure to tag it for the second hour. You have to ask the question and then tag it, and then we'll go from there. If you want to share this, I've had a couple of requests recently, and if you want to share this, you use the link that I'm posting to Makana right now. Don't use your own link, or people will come in as you. All right, Bill, let's take it away.
All righty. Our first question's in from Paul Prusakowski of Gainesville, Florida. He says, I'm going to be purchasing some Blackmagic cameras to be controlled remotely via an ATEM Mini Pro. Any suggestions on choosing between the Pocket Cinema 4K or the Micro Studio 4K?
Yeah, go ahead, Roscoe.
Yeah, I have both of them, and I use the Micro Studio 4K in my studio because the 4K wasn't out at that point in time. It needs a lot more light. And from an operational standpoint, the menus and all that, if you actually want to operate the camera out in the field away from an ATEM switcher, you'll find the Pocket much easier. The menus on the back, the 5-inch display, far and away get the Pocket 4K. The only argument for the Micro Studio, and well, I mean, with the new Blackmagic HDMI to SDI bidirectional, it doesn't matter. You can control it with anything.
Yeah, it's smaller, more compact, and you can put it in a lot of little places as far as the micro. But that'd be the reason to use it. I have a couple, and I like them, but I would never buy them over the 4K at this point. They're really long in the tooth. You don't have you don't have the full log. You can't shoot and log. You can't, and we push them to that, but it's just not the same. Yeah, go ahead, Roscoe.
I was going to say, the only thing is it has both an SDI and an HDMI. The Micro has both an SDI and an HDMI that are both active all the time. So that's, if you need both of those, that's the only argument for it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Next question.
Our friend Talak Lopez Waterman says, how does the new playback in the new Zoom update work? Has anybody on the panel tested it for quality specifically?
I don't know if anybody's tested it yet. We might have to ask that question in a week. This is the new, this is in screen share, I believe. Let's see here. But I haven't, let's see here. Yeah, I don't know. We haven't tried it yet. So we'll have to, I can't even find it. so ask us in a week. We'll try to look for it.
We had a show last night. Nobody had time to play with stuff.
Yep, exactly. Next question.
Angela Eiserman, our friend from Golden Bridges, New York, said, any hiccups to watch out while we set up our first Vmix show? We have an experienced op, but anything I can to deal with content creation or coordination, any ideas to help with the process?
If you have an experienced op, I think you'll be largely okay. Is there any formats that you want to look at that for playback? I don't know if there's if it's how sensitive it is to that. I haven't had to do it. Go ahead, Chris.
Not specifically on topic, but I think it's super interesting because this is not the first time I've heard people say we're doing a Vmix show. I've heard clients say that. And it's interesting. Like you would have never said, "Oh, we're doing a Grass Valley show,"
Well, I think that The platform, I mean, so especially if you're using if you're using their vMix caller, it really is a vMix show. Like it's you're kind of pulling it together there. And yeah, good luck. Let us know, Angela, how it works. I know we see you oftentimes before the show, but you'll have to come on sometime and let us know. Go ahead, Guy.
Yeah, hopefully I just totally switched mics the last second, so hopefully we're dialed in pretty decent. Looks like we're all right. So one thing that I've noticed is the GPU creeping up because of too many videos inside of as inputs. So if you're putting in PowerPoints, external sources, use the external sources, but playlists are your friend. So you can knock down your GPU settings quite a bit by putting all your PowerPoint slides, all your images in playlists instead of just throwing them in the main area. So that's one tip.
Next question
comes from Brian Anderson, and this one's going to be interesting to chat about. How do you estimate for shooting and editing a video? Talking head in studio, scripted on prompter, B-roll is provided. One shoot will yield 5 to 6 videos totaling 30 minutes in length. Things like lower thirds and so forth will be built once and reused. Do you quote cost per finished minute? Other ways? And there's a note there. I know this is like asking how much does a car cost? Looking for metrics and standards to quote by.
There's a lot of different, I think a lot of times it depends on the client too. Generally, I do the best I can to quote people on whole numbers, as close to a whole number as possible. Like this is how much it's going to cost to do it, or this is how much it's going to cost per video to do it without getting into the line items. But there's a lot of clients that are going to want to see line items. And so then you have to make stuff up that will make sense. I mean, we do it all internally. It's just the problem is a lot of times, like I just finished a job that was complex. I hit the final number within $1,000 and it was a $500,000 budget. But where the money went inside of it, there was some that were plus 80% over budget, and there's other parts that are negative 67%. And we did the analysis of it, and so it's like this is plus 12, this is minus 30, whatever. So the number was accurate, the final number was accurate, but the like how we got there, and it's like that every show, and you're just kind of like, I will admit that I produce line items for clients because it makes them feel better, but I always think that it's just kind of this is just a waste of time. Go ahead, Brian, and then Chris.
So yeah, this came out of a conversation yesterday, and I don't know the total length. The guy's like, 30, 40 minutes, something like that, 5, maybe 6 minutes. So I know the things that are firm fixed, like the graphics, you build the lower third ones, you're going to use it all the way along. So there's those things that are firm fixed, but I sort of need to give him some kind of this much per minute or something, so that as he's writing the script, it's easy to say so many words per minute, a fast read, slow read. I can give him, he can just come up with
I mean, usually it's how many crew days do you have involved in the process? I mean, I would do it more in just overall time. And because the reality is the difference between, depending on what he's doing, the difference between 2 minutes and 8 minutes is nothing. It just depends on how much editing there's done, how much graphics there's being added, how much quality value you're adding to that. Because the raw cost per word or per minute isn't as important as how much time how many crew members do you need to shoot it? And then how many editing days do you think is required to get it done? And then take into account, the cost of the equipment and computers and everything else. Don't leave that out. It's really tempting to give people the cameras in the studio and everything else. That's probably the thing that our clients, at least, or my clients, that's the last thing that they argue with. Like they totally get that number. It's all the other numbers that we get pushed around on. Go ahead, Chris.
I'm not a fan of Judge Judy, but I read a story last night about how she makes $47 million a year doing that show, and
well played.
Right.
Played.
And so she, every 3 years, she goes back to CBS and or whatever, the production company, and she goes, here's my new number. And one year, one of the execs slid an envelope across the table to her, and she said, oh, I'm sorry, you misunderstood. This is not a negotiation. And she stood up and walked out of the room.
Yeah.
And she still does the show.
Yeah,
that's some gangster level negotiation.
It also just depends on where you are as far as what leverage you have. Like I admit that I'm like inches away from booking all of 2021, and once I get to that level where it's all booked, everybody new coming in just gets a number. Like this is like I'm not asking anymore. And it's a fair number, but I'm not going to sit there and break it all down. It's just a matter of having the leverage to do that. Go ahead, Bill.
Well, Brian, if you're going to be doing this forever, I do think you need some sort of a spreadsheet or form that you can work with that makes this a whole lot easier. And I've shown mine before, and I've cut off the top of it because I didn't have time to sanitize this. And this is just on a little simple little reshoot. So what this form does, and I built this in FileMaker Pro decades ago, is it just says you're going to have a thing. And this is kind of the old traditional above the line costs that are one time only. Production cost is where I have how many cameras, how many units, and the unit could be a thing, a camera. It could also be a day. What is that going to cost? And then have it extrapolate the total from that. By having a spreadsheet where your normal costs are all listed, what it does is you don't forget things. You go through the process. I try never to show this to a client. This is my worksheet. Now, if they demand line items, I can show them this and talk it through with them. But it just tells me that the top line are going to be fixed things. This was a little tiny thing that we did an extra day on a project that I already made my money on. So I just said, man, a little administration fee. Those other things in the top graph are fixed costs you pay for once. So if I have somebody on staff that's going to be using that, I'll throw them a little bit of a cost for that. Talent, music, those are licenses you use one time, and they're not variable by how many days you shoot or how long you go for a day. The production stuff is. That's all how many days, how many people for how much time. So some point in a spreadsheet that allows you to track that stuff and change, I'm going to take out crew 2 and put in the boom operator and put their rate in there.
Yeah, we're going to run out of time here going through this,
Yeah,
but
this is a long subject.
The main thing is that you do want to do a spreadsheet for everything that you do and make the calculations, and then you do want to look at it. The best thing that you're going to do is you just iterate. Okay, well, that took a lot longer than I expected. This was painful. I took it in the teeth on that one. I've had shows where I was like, "Whoa, that was like there's a bunch of things that I didn't expect that cost a lot of money, but then I save them in the next time, or I save it over." You just have to know that at some point you just put the number out there and then you live by that number. Go ahead, Brian.
It's really helpful. I've built a spreadsheet. My problem is the studio and the equipment, all that I have is at the university. We bought that to do 5-year-long projects. And so you're just working and it wasn't costing it out. All of a sudden now we're in this position where we need to provide the services to people, and I don't have the metrics because I didn't have to keep them. And I don't know.
Also call around and find out what other studios are charging for what they're doing. So you kind of know what your market rate is. Just to kind of sit inside of it. I oftentimes with that kind of thing, when it's something you already own, I try to get into the market rate and then tuck it down a little below it, just because I can.
Yeah. And the rate isn't so much the issue. It's the time. If people with more experience like Bill and others here, Sky, if you're shooting this thing, it's going to take you 4 hours to edit it. It's that metric that I don't have.
And
another really good technique is just to say, look, I've got a camera. I just bought it. It's going to last 5 years, and it's going to be worthless because they're revving them. So you can do the depreciated cost of that asset.
But
plus
for the
enough
time,
to replace it.
To go back to time, which was the specific question there, is that the bottom line is you'll get paid more or less per hour based on your accuracy. And you'll calculate it against what you think you should get paid. And then I've done jobs where I made $5 an hour. Because I didn't calculate that correctly, and that's just part of your education. Time is the easiest one, especially if it's yours. If it's somebody else's, it's expensive. But if it's your time, or people's time that are already on overhead, you do the best you can to calculate it, but do keep track of it so that you can make it better the next time. Let's go on to the next question.
Yeah. Okay. Moving on to Kevin Murphy of Palm Desert, California. Interactivity for events in 2020. Any big takeaways? Where to push it in 2021?
I'm just waiting for other people to raise their hand, but the thing that we really found was, number one, is that I recorded keynotes were more successful than I thought they would be, especially when you add interactivity to it. So where it made sense was when you have a keynote and then people can actually comment and discuss the keynote while it's going on, it becomes something that we're all doing together, and so in that sense, the recorded keynote actually was more effective. If it's just a play out without without a place for people to discuss it, it's probably not as effective. The big thing that we saw both with what we're doing here, but also a lot of the stuff that I did with clients, we did probably close to 200 events last year, and the the scale at which we started getting to as we started really getting our, that we were bringing people in from all over the United States instantly without any trouble. We're not flying them in, we're not putting them up, we're not trying to figure out the logistics. We're just bringing them in over their webcams. Sometimes we're sending them all webcams. Sometimes they're just coming in over what they had, which is usually horrible. You're sorry, but I just have to, it's just kind of amazing that we got this far and people aren't investing in their kit. That's all. It's just like, I would like to wear jeans and a t-shirt all the time, or cutoffs and a t-shirt and flip-flops, all the time, like that's, no matter what, so, anyway, so I think that what we found was that the ability for us to grab, just bring people in from all over the world, bring people in from all over the US, incorporate them in, interact with their audience. It's a really, really powerful way to do it. I'm doing everything I can to never go back to physical events. I'm just flat out, I'm not interested. I might put up with hybrid events this year and next year, if a client pays me enough, but I kind of am done, like I can see what's possible, with what can be done, where you can build shows that are just bigger than anything you could do in the physical world. And so, we're kind of unshackled at this point, and a lot of this technology is getting better and better. When we look at where Zoom's going, where Zoom OSC is going, where just a bunch of us are going, where what Blue's doing, what Jeff Keithley's doing, and what I'm working on, I'm not interested in going back. I'm not saying that they'll go away. It's just that I think that there's going to be a huge industry just doing virtual events that doesn't require being shackled to this physical, BS. Kevin, and then John, and then Jan.
With the interactivity you saw with the recorded keynotes, I think I observed too that like the recorded keynote was really good. And then I, for the first time, had this experience where there was the presenter in the chat. And is that what you're talking about, where the presenter's in the chat answering questions? Yeah, that was amazing.
So the Dolby chat, which a lot of us went to, which I can talk about just because it was something we were allowed to promote inside the group. With Dolby Chat, the engineers were there. So while you're watching, it's an all-day show, and there's 6 or 8 of some of the top thinkers in Dolby, around vision and Atmos and everything else, answering your questions. So in some way, you're all in this conversation, watching this recording, and then having these people answer the questions. And I feel like that is a really lethal, combination where, and we've done this before, where I've talked about this in the past, but we did one where we still had a live event that we were doing, but we had engineers in the background answering questions about a new product release. And we were able to cut through 150, 200 questions an hour, and that is when you start getting into that mixture of text response as well as video response, you end up with this ability to manage, like if you're doing a product launch, if I was a company and I was looking for ROI, first of all, I'd work on how do I create events and everything else to build up a following so that I can actually get the people, and then I would be doing launch events with a staff of people that can answer all the small questions, some video showing off big ones, but then people opening up to Q&A. I was just talking to someone yesterday about it, and we were talking like, you have a little video you want to play 10 minutes of the video and then talk for an hour, like answer people's questions for an hour, let the video be nice and clean way that you want to describe what your new product is, but then have a bunch of conversation about what that means and how it works, and interact with the audience. And you get a lot more active, much more active listening. People, when the one thing we definitely saw when we've seen here, we've seen everywhere else, is Q&A drives attention. Like it just, it's a very, very powerful tool to drive, and Q&A and interaction, drive attention, average view time, attention, active listening, all those things. Whereas just talks never did. Remember, when we forget that when I go to conferences, I don't know what you're like, but when I go to conferences, I don't sit in the front, I sit in the back. I got a laptop open, I got my cell phone, I'm kind of listening with one ear and kind of working away. That we were doing that anyway. It's just that now, we're more conscious to it, and we're more likely to do it even more than we were before. But, we're definitely seeing, where we saw the jump is when the South African strain of COVID turned, when it suddenly started showing up in other countries, a bunch of our clients just gave up. Like there was just something that just kind of broke that. Like we just suddenly, like that's what all of 2021 up until the South African strain was all people waiting to go back to physical events. And there was just something that all of our meetings changed overnight when it got out of South Africa, and so people are now just, they're now focusing on how to, they can't wait any longer. So they just have to keep moving forward. And as they do that, they're going to find bigger ways to do this than anything we could do physically. I mean, we're almost past that, go ahead, John.
Well, the question we have is we're, at the Monterey group where we're staged, and we're talking about doing just virtual events, but some of the clients are, as we're booking things out further, saying, well, if we could come back, we want to make it hybrid. And we're trying to explain those are two different events.
Yeah.
And just how do you explain that to them? Yeah. You were very useful, Alex. I used a video clip of you where you described what a conference center should do. I need the Alex equivalent of, once you go virtual, do virtual. Don't make us talk about a hybrid event, possibly added on a month before just because we get permission to bring people in.
It's just so hard. You can't, like the audience, again, the online audience will always be in the kids table. If you have a physical, any kind of hybrid, if there's more than 10 people in the room, the entire online audience is in the kids table.
We agree with that, but it's these hotel people and the conference planners, they go, we want to get them back in that room.
Horses were a lot faster and a lot more agile at the beginning of the cars. Cars were broke down all the time. You could only take them on the road. There's a whole lot of limitations to cars for a long time. Solid 10 or 20 years, the cars were 10 years. Cars were a lot less efficient. And then after that, it stopped like making sense. And so I don't think that it's going to be overnight, but the turn has already happened, and we're just going to see it continue to go down that path. Go ahead, Jan, and then Sky.
I'm convinced you're right in what you're saying about that. I know in my industry, with the concert industry, everybody's thinking about how they're going to modify it so that even when they do the live show, they're going to be doing the streaming. So that's happening. The question and answer aspect of it, when you're watching talking heads, it's very boring. Zoom fatigue. This environment is perfect for keeping people involved. Last thing the thing that I wanted to say was you did a lot of work for the Obama White House, and now a lot of the same people are in the White House. And I would assume that the technology that you got working for the government really expanded your horizons. Do you see anything that in your future working with the Biden administration and expanding those horizons?
I didn't work for the Obama. I did work for Obama Foundation. We've had done post the election, but during the Obama time, I worked for Google. so it was all those events from the White House were a Google event that were at the White House. So there's a distinction there in the sense that the government never pays for that kind of thing. And so it would have to be an external device. I think that they have a lot of their own people when they're a lot of their own opinions about how to run virtual events. I don't know if I necessarily agree with it, but I think that they're pretty hardened in their opinions in the Biden administration. So they'll probably continue down that path. Go ahead, Sky.
I'm just still reflecting on Brian's question and then how it bleeds into John's question and the how do we come alongside and bring value to our client with our media professional experience for their ROI? And that's a much longer question, but the two words that I wanted to say were value and ROI.
Well, I mean, the one thing that I do now with clients is that I will tell them my opinion about how they should run their event, but I let them know at the very beginning, I'm going to give you a bunch of opinions based on 2,000 events that I have about your event. You may not agree with me and you may decide to do it some other way. This first meeting will be the only time you ever hear me talk about it. So I'll tell you what I think you should do. And then if you decide you want to do something else, I'll never talk about it again. We'll just do it the way you want to do it. But I then generally unwind everything that they had planned and put it back together. Like, this is how you get the maximum number of viewers and the most engagement and the most ROI, because we see it all the time. So I for a long time, I would just never say anything. I would just do it however they wanted me to do it. I found that it's better to at least have the opening conversation. About 30 or 40% of the time, they make significant adjustments to their program, and the rest of the time, I just do whatever they want to do. It's your nickel. Next question.
Moving on to Terry Donor of Richmond Hill, Ontario. Terry is interested in what are the best choices for media playback over Zoom. I'd like the look of screen share with the operability of using a media server.
Go ahead, Guy.
Yeah, first I'd do some tests and see what it looks like on the other side. So if you have your computer and you can get one more, I would try and do screen share with optimized video on and see how that looks for you. If that is okay, then you might be fine there. But if you want the ultimate is to get somebody with a 1080p account, or you can also use a portal or something to boost the resolution. Otherwise, that playback's going to be at 360p, which doesn't look very good unless you are doing screen share. The way that we do it at the highest level is to throw Vmix up in the cloud and push it out that way, because you get the stability and performance, especially on a 1080p account, of it just playing back smoothly with no hiccups, because the internet up there is moving at 2000 megabits a second and it's backed up power. So that's the way at the highest level. So if you're saying what are the best choices, that's the best. And you can hire people like Doug that can do that stuff for you. So otherwise, jump into the Zoom test kitchen at noon today, and you can try and play with us in there and push media around, and we'll tell you what it looks like.
Good, Mickey, and then John.
Yeah, another option that I like doing is using a separate machine to play back the content via QLab and feed that out to an ATEM Mini into the machine that's doing the actual broadcast.
Yep, John.
And one of the nice things about the new video playback in Zoom is that when you play back a video file, the control of the playback, the pause, stop, fast forward, rewind, and volume is only seen by the host. So in the old mode, when you did a screen share and showed video, those players might show up. So that's a different playback tool that you didn't have before.
Where is the playback tool?
Video Advanced.
It's not in there. Like
Yeah,
10 people have all looked for it, and we're not
Oh,
seeing
you know
it.
what? Because I haven't upgraded yet. So that's probably why. All right. Oh,
Yeah, a new upgrade should be there. If it's not, I've seen it. I know it exists.
I use generally we're using QLab for playout, and then I use Mimo Live to just do simple play-ins. Let's go to the next question. We're running out of time.
JJ McKinnon, the Santa Venetia, and up by Marin County, California, with consideration to the idea of offering a skill verification methodology. Dan Steps, could some of the barriers to entry in this field be addressed with a virtual hosted environment, perhaps similar to the software as a service concept posited last night? Note the idea would be a bench that anyone can use for a time rather than buying all the gears, especially since many of us are still looking for work.
Yeah, I mean, the idea is like, how do you have all that infrastructure set up in the same way that like we can't all afford to have 1080p accounts or business accounts, and how do we, rent those from each other or share them from each other? And I think that those are definitely possibilities. I'm a strong proponent of, I believe that there's going to be a bunch of little studios that start to get built up around the country. That a lot of people disagree with me. They're like, oh, everybody's got a little studio, but the studios almost nobody's making good studios. They're making old fashioned studios that are old thinking and not designed for interactive events. And so if you built the next generation of studios and you built them from the ground up to be connected to each other so that you could do virtual events where someone could walk in, we are going to move at the second half of this year, in my opinion, to where we can do small events. I just don't think we'll go back to big events. And so I think that, but people need a place to go. To the point of this question, people need somewhere to go where they don't have to spend $30,000 on, but they want to look like they spent $30,000 or $500 or whatever it is. They want to have all those tools, but they only need them for the day, and so, and they don't need them to load in. And I think that there's a big opportunity to build little studios that are designed for that interactive experience. Of course, I've thought about that since before COVID. I was building them in 2018. I just didn't quite, I was a little early. Go ahead, Bill.
I've just been surprised that one of the larger distributed chains that are into real estate, and I'm thinking like Alpha Graphics that have a zillion locations, a lot of their stuff, the old printing stuff, is kind of falling slowly but surely out of favor. They should be connecting, putting in video booths. They should be able to allow people to do that sort of stuff. And that would be the real estate play, to get this in every little area where you don't have to have everything at home.
The problem is that you have to go far enough. And most people have done they try it and they make very small steps that direction, and it doesn't work, and then they give up. And so, like WeWork started going down that path. WeWork's the perfect one. Like WeWork is, they should put a studio in every single, thing. And they started doing that with Cheddar or whatever. But it was, typical, kids putting this together with no idea of how to create good content. And it just looked horrible, and of course it didn't go anywhere, and so it doesn't have to look that way. I'm sure that they spent a lot of money on it looking bad, but it was not, professionally produced. And then you end up with professional produced, and then they want Grass Valley everything. There's a happy medium between those two that we've kind of run into over time that isn't super expensive, but is very effective. And just nobody's doing that. Go ahead, Jan, and then Courtney.
Is there an association, a co-op, or a timeshare situation where someone who doesn't need high speed all the time, doesn't need 1080p, could go into a group and say, hey, I can buy this for one day?
Not really.
Upgrade
I mean,
my
there's
speed.
there's definitely, I mean, that's what we're talking about, the possibility of it, but there's not a lot of places to do that right now. Yeah, Courtney.
And what you're describing sounds a little bit like the Kinko's model in desktop publishing. When desktop publishing came in, everybody couldn't afford the expensive laser printers and the high volume copiers and all this
Yep.
paper handling stuff. So that model applied to video production, could work. But the problem with video production is the moving target. The technology is advancing so fast.
It's really
that
not,
I
though.
don't know if
Like,
you'll be
it's
able
not-
to
it's-
achieve a good ROI before your
it's-
equipment's all obsolete.
It's not, like the funny, well, the thing that has saved us for many of us that are Blackmagic folks is Blackmagic. I can now buy, a 4K pipeline. A 4K pipeline will last for at least 5 years, and it's not very expensive. And probably 10 years, like the chances of needing to do corporate work over 4K in the next decade is probably very low. And so the thing is that you could buy a system and build it out in a way that would last for a long time. And so now if you're right that if you buy a 1080p system at, that are, again, a Grass Valley style approach, it's not going to work. But I think that a Blackmagic pipeline with all that hardware will last a long time, to make that work, especially because of the open API, because I can keep on programming how that equipment works and how it integrates and how it maintains itself over a long period of time. Go ahead, Scott.
But as evidenced by the ATEM Mini, is Blackmagic is going to come out with something, better and cheaper that's going to democratize it so that people aren't going to need to go to a third party to
the problem is that most people still don't do this. I mean, and the thing is, the ATEM Mini wouldn't replace a studio like this, because it's great for someone to do it from their desk, but they're still going to there's a huge number of people that are not going to be able to handle an ATEM Mini or a camera or lights or all the other things. The ATEM Mini, it's great that it's $300, but I still have a $2,000 camera, a couple $1,000s of lights. I've got mics. I've got someone to manage that. I've got a way, like, for instance, all the comms that need to be tied between all those locations and all the organizational processes. And so it's not just, it's great and it has democratized it, but it's not going to drop the bottom out. People still need services, like, even though Hangouts were free and even though Zoom was free, people still pay someone to do them because they don't understand it. Go ahead, Sky. We're going to move on. We're keep moving. Next question.
Okay, Bernard Bernstein of Newton, Massachusetts is in next with looking for advice. We've been streaming theater, Zoom OSC, Isadora to Vimeo. Our next show, we want to have talkback, where audience members can raise their hands and ask questions on video. We can stream into Zoom via virtual cameras instead. Should we use Zoom meeting or webinar?
Yeah, go ahead, Mickey.
Yeah, I would say if you're comfortable using Zoom OSC, then I would do it in a meeting so that you can set up a separate breakout room where you can bring the speaking audience into, and you can integrate them into the show through those breakout rooms. And with Zoom OSC, you can keep everyone muted until you say so, until you actually give the control to unmute someone. Though it would be great to know as well when webinars will finally get breakout rooms, as we heard a couple months ago.
Yeah, one of the things I was thinking about, that's with breakout rooms, I think one thing that Zoom could do that would add a lot of value is the ability to add basically a host in every breakout room broadcast capability. so that you could have 8 breakout rooms or 20 breakout rooms. And if you push a video into the main one, you can say distribute to all rooms. That way everybody could watch an event as a plenary, but then still have their own little conversations as well. And then that would let you do a couple things like this that would be useful.
A proctor function.
Yeah, just be able to, I want to broadcast to all, because we can do that in the cloud right now. Like we join every room with a room. Sorry, join every breakout room with a Zoom room, and then you pass the videos to all of them. One video in our system to all of them. But there's no easy way for a person running Zoom to do that right now. Next question.
Kenton Hook of Westchester, Pennsylvania, I presume, looking for a way to control 120 volt LED lighting. Currently, the lighting is on 3 different light switches. I want to be able to control them over DMX, but retain the physical control options by the door.
Go ahead, Roscoe.
Yeah, they make DMX wall switches, and they usually come with more than just a couple buttons. So a lot of times they have 5 or 6, but I'm sure we can find one and throw one in the link for you.
I also, my lights, for instance, are on, sorry, my lights are on a, in my Apple, whatever, you know, I have an outlet that they're all connected to. So for instance, if I hit them, they all turn off really quickly on my phone. So, so that's the, you know, so that's how I turn the lights on and off is, you know, on my phone is just having them all with central power. So if you're looking for something with physical control, you can do that as well. Next question.
Tony Mobley of Newman, Georgia. Alex, when writing on the multiple keynote slides, are you using an Apple Pencil?
Yeah. It's the number one reason to have an iPad, in my opinion, is the pencil. Next question.
Moving on to Francisco Manriquez of Sonoma, California. Open question, looking to purchase a new MacBook Air as the old one died. If I'm using it for live Zoom fitness classes, should I upgrade the storage and memory option on the Apple Store, or do I just get the bare minimum MacBook Air?
Number one is I would think hard about the Air and consider the Mini. So if I was streaming and I want to have some more in and outs of the computer, I want to be able to put it somewhere in the corner and tie stuff into it and have more flexibility, I would look strongly at the Mini. The Air has so few inputs. It only has, I think, one or two USB-Cs, where the Mini is going to have 2 USB-Cs and then a bunch of USBs and, you know, an HDMI out. And so it's going to give you, if you're trying to do a streaming, I would probably not use the Air for that. Go ahead, because you're not going to want to use that camera anyway. The Air's camera is worthless. So you're going to want to put an external, as soon as you want to put an external camera, why are you getting an Air versus a Mini? So, you know, like that'd be my recommendation. Jan?
You will never, ever regret getting as much memory and as much RAM as you could possibly get. So when you're buying something, buy as much as you can afford as far as RAM and as far as storage.
Yeah, I mean, I bought a whole bunch of ones with 8 gigs and they work just fine for streaming. You know, I'm not asking them to do anything else and I don't expect them to. So, you know, the 8 versus 16 for me isn't that important. I also don't tend to get very large hard drives because I don't like the idea of keeping lots of footage. You get lazy and you start filling up your hard drive with lots of stuff, and then you have to send it in for repair, and then you don't send in repair, or you wait, or you worry about it when you send it in because it's got all this data. I try to keep everything on external drives so that I can just pull my computer out and hand it to somebody, and there's nothing on it that matters, you know. And so it's just 2 different ways of thinking. Next question.
Mark Harder, Brooklyn's in with Guy. What is the Zoom test kitchen?
Oh, hey, we needed a place just to practice spotlighting and just moving things around and blowing stuff up. So we created this group. It's Jeff Widgren's group, and we just go in there and just play and allow people to take over and just try stuff out and go into breakout rooms and sort and see just what happens. So it's a good place to test.
Great. Next question.
Michael Peters of Oakland, Virginia. I'm using Vmix to pre-record some executives. What service will give me the best quality? Zoom, Vmix Call, Skype, or Teams?
Yeah, go ahead, Kevin.
I think there's some solutions out there like Riverside.fm that'll actually record locally. So I wouldn't try to pre-record with Vmix just because of the network latency that's going to be introduced there completely. But there are some services you can use that do a real high quality record on the local end, and then they upload it once it's done.
Go ahead, Jeffrey.
Yeah, what we're doing is we're taking an Android device that we're going to be sending to the person, and then we're going to use Team. I think it's going to be TeamViewer. Haven't decided between TeamViewer and I can't think of the other program, and we'll remote into the Android device. That way we can set it up a little bit. These are higher end 4K to 8K cameras, so we can do any type of zooming in that or cropping as needed. And then that way we can control everything from the recording to uploading and everything.
Go ahead, Sky.
I record weekly directly to Zoom and then download it to my laptop. I don't use their cloud-based service. It gives me a good quality video that I produce a show with.
We've done back in the day, we would use two phones, one that was doing the interaction and the other one that was doing the shooting, and we just get them to hit record, and we'd end up with the maximum resolution on the phone. And they still have to send them back to us, but it's another way to do it. And we've also done tons of Zoom records as well. I think that Zoom will probably give you, if you have the 1080 option, you'll get a pretty high quality record, about the best over the web, in my opinion. I mean, other than specialized services. It depends on how much interaction you need as well, as far as how much back and forth. But I actually haven't used Riverside FM, so I'm going to check that out as well. Because I mean, having local records, I've definitely worked on a lot of them. Squadcast for audio, I've been on the tail end of. I've been a participant, and it's pretty seamless from my perspective, where you just have a conversation and then it uploads the file. Next question.
Comes from Jan Landy on the panel here from Las Vegas. I have social media marketing question. As we cater to an industry rather than a neighborhood, what's the best way to advertise our production services using social media?
Facebook. Facebook is the best way to advertise social media. I mean, like, it is no close second. I mean, if you open up the Facebook advertising portal, it's like looking into the sun. And that's why they don't want you to stop. I would do it now as opposed to later, because Apple's about to cut their knees off from under them. But while the getting's good, Facebook is just an incredible, the amount of pinpoint accuracy that you can make, where you're spending no more money than you need to get back. It's incredible. And then Google as a secondary. Go ahead, Jan.
Just to expand on that, I noticed that whenever I go into the Facebook advertising, it only wants me to advertise to local areas rather than to the group. So in other words, I'd like to pick groups, like, for example, let's just say audio engineers, and I want to place an ad into them, but I can't seem to figure out how to do that.
You absolutely can. I don't know what I haven't done it for so long. I haven't had to manage an ad campaign for a long time on it, but we used to do national hits, where we're looking at. The problem with national is that it just gets really expensive, because you're trying to get across a very large number of people. So you need a certain amount of investment. It may be that you're just not, the threshold of advertising is not high enough where it won't reach critical mass if you go to that level. So, but I think that you do need, I think there is a minimum spend on the national or international advertising, or national advertising, not international, but national advertising across Facebook. Most of the stuff I've done has been mostly local, so I haven't thought about it. And I just give it a region that I want to hit. And then you say, and again, I'm not saying whether Facebook, the question was not, do I think that's right, that Facebook should be so good at what they're doing, or are they doing the right thing, or am I a big fan of Facebook? None of those things apply to the fact that what is the best place to advertise? Facebook. So, but I don't know. You may have to hand pick the regions, to do that, rather than going after it. You might go after, for AV, Los Angeles, Las Vegas, New York, Chicago, San Francisco, at least to start. Google is a little bit different because it's based on search terms. So you're competing for search terms. The thing to know about Google is what makes it effective is you having a landing place on the other end that is really dedicated to that search engine, because Google is looking at the effectiveness of your ad, not just whether you're not just paying for a display ad on Google. You have to be effective. So the number of click-throughs and how deep they go into your website actually affects how much you pay and how much, what it goes through, because Google is incentivizing you to create a good experience for the person who clicked through. So both of those take a little time. I would definitely take courses on on those, because they're not just, oh, I'm going to buy some Google ads. Like you have to, that'll be really expensive and very ineffective. You have to build a page. Like you don't send them to your web page. You send them to a page that is going to accept people who clicked on that ad. And then you're going to give them exactly what they need to know. You're going to engage them to respond, possibly to go ahead and buy through. You're going to create hooks for Google all the way through that. I mean, if you want to get the most out of it, where you're paying the least amount and getting the most effectiveness out of Google, that's the other one. And Facebook is more of a pinpoint process. They're two different kinds of advertising, and they obviously I've streamed a lot of things about them. So but both of them are like, I don't understand how anybody, when you know how they work, I don't know how anybody even survives in this industry that isn't Google and Facebook. Like that's, why everyone's so terrified of them. I mean, it's so effective, like just, to do those advertising campaigns when you know what you're doing. Usually when you're in meetings with folks that do Facebook, they talk about the multiplier. It took me a long time to figure out what the multiplier was. The multiplier was how much money are they getting out to what they're putting in. And then a lot of them were sitting there, what's your multiplier? About 5 or 6. That means every dollar they put in, they're getting 5 or 6 back. That's why they're big companies. Anyway, next question.
Daniel Goldstein of Washington, D.C. is up next with, we have a colleague with a green screen cyclorama studio, and they're used to post-production where there's more tolerance for a sloppy key. What grip gear should they buy now that they're trying to key live?
Go ahead, Guy.
$295 for an ATEM Mini. It's not grip gear, it's production gear. I'd consider it at that point, because you're getting the gear that used to cost about 30 grand from an Ultimate inside of an ATEM. So you can dial it in. There's some videos on YouTube showing you how to use it, and that's what I would get.
Go ahead, Mickey.
Yeah, I would take a look at butterflies. Essentially, they're very soft. Guy, please help me describe butterflies. It's a piece of silk, and usually they come in sizes like 5x5 or 20x20, and they will allow you to get a very soft light by shooting, like, say, really strong light. Like in the past, they used to use total lights, which are like 2K open face lights through them, and it's an easy way to get an even spread of light across a large space.
I mean, the thing that has saved me more than anything else is scopes. So scope, having RGB parade is kind of the RGB parade, and the lumiscopes are your luminance scopes are probably the most useful thing for me. What I want is to see a line going straight across that's as thin as possible. That's what for a key, and then I want about 30 to 40 points, 30 points minimum between the green and the blue and the red is typically what I'm looking for. And and so if I can get to that or get close to that, I know I'm going to get a reasonably good key. So having scopes, the ATEM Mini is great for live keying. It's not an Ultimate. I mean, there's an Ultimate that's more expensive, and I've used the Ultimate 12, which is the newest one. And there's two things about the Ultimate. One is it handles 4K, so you can key in 4K. Even if you're going out to 1080p, being able to key at twice the resolution and going back down is very powerful. And the keyer is still more detailed and gives you more control than what you have in the switchers. I thought when I got the new advanced key that it was like amazing. Okay, I thought it was the best. This is one of the best keyers I've ever used. So you can go a long way with the ATEM Mini or the Constellation or whatever. And then I got to test the Ultimate 12, and it was the best key I've ever seen. I mean, keying glass.
Couldn't figure that
green
thing.
Screen.
I couldn't figure that thing out. It takes like an engineer.
Now I will admit, I've owned an Ultimate. I owned an Ultimate 11 for a decade. So I mean, so to me, Ultimates are something that I understand a lot. Because we've done lots and lots of keying with Ultimates, and so for me, the Ultimate made sense, and it just takes it to a whole another level as far as keying goes. I was amazed at what I was able to dial in. When I tested the 12, but they do need better training. So like that's what they're missing on that. Yeah, go ahead, Bill, and then Courtney.
Well, since he's talking specifically about a cyc studio, which means a big open space that's entirely green, those are often lit with barrel lights. It's a circular form that has a very bright light inside that tosses a ton of light out. The full ones have in all directions. They have them that are black on one side of a barrel. It looks like a 55-gallon barrel almost, hung up in the cyc to just toss even light everywhere. You see those if you look at big cyc studios a lot.
Courtney?
Yeah, I'd say, getting back to the question for grip equipment, I'd make sure you have plenty of C-stands with flags because you're going to want to keep the key lights and backlights and rim lights off of the background to keep it even, and light the background with maybe, if they have a grid in the cyc, get an array of keynote flows or some sort of fluorescent green lights that they can light the cyc with that won't spill onto your talent. And like I say, grips, lots of C-stands, flags to modulate the lighting and make sure you keep it off the background.
And we'll move pretty quickly now. We're running out of time. Next question.
Moving on to the next piece, which is Tim Erskine from Cupertino. What features would you put into a 21st century studio?
It's good. It's a great question. What you should do is put that in the second hour suggestions inside of it. I said I would cover it, and I could have done it this week, and I just didn't remember. So I look at the second hour questions. So go put it in there and put a bunch of votes on it. And then when I'm looking through it, I'm starting to schedule February, but it really deserves a whole hour to talk about studios. But there's a lot that could be done, and it's not being done right now. So I'm happy to talk about it. Next question.
James from Dublin, Ireland says, I recently started looking back over the archive of office hours on YouTube. You all look so much better now of all the changes the panelists have made to their setup over the years. In the last year, which one are the happiest with?
Go ahead, Roscoe.
Getting off Wi-Fi and running a cable.
That makes a big difference. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that a lot of us have tuned up our lighting and cameras, and just keeps on. It's kind of an ever changing evolution. Thank you. Next question.
Okay, moving on to Dan Huber of Erie, Pennsylvania. What will the surprise guest on MacBreak be talking about today?
I have no idea. I don't know. So I don't look at the Mac. They don't usually have the MacBreak list of things until after about 9:30 a.m. So I won't know what that is until then. So then I'll go through and research all the stuff between that and 11. Next question.
Chris Russo of Red Hook, New York. What are the pros and cons of playing out a production to a Zoom webinar via a virtual webcam capture card or a screen share? If a screen share, what's the best screen setting for resolution? Please discuss asking for a friend.
Go ahead, Roscoe.
Yeah, I mean, it's always resolution versus frame rates for, so it's the same trade-off. If you want high resolution, screen share. If you want smoother motion, then don't screen share.
I mean, if you can get away with 720p and you don't have a 1080p, it's very hard to get the 1080p, but if you can get a portal or get a Zoom room and you can join, you'll get a 720p, and you can do a lot. I mean, we did a lot of streaming for a long time with 720p, and you're going to be able to get full frame rate.
360 though out on webinar. Still, even with the portal, so
right.
No good, no
yeah,
bueno.
So, well, for a webinar, you would need to you need to figure out a way to make the request to get it to a higher resolution. If you really need the resolution, I guess I would say that there's two different ways. Back to what Roscoe said, I screen share a QuickTime, so I do a produced external all the hardware, push it into a QuickTime, and then screen share that QuickTime. I'm going to get lower resolution or lower frame rate, but high resolution, in that QuickTime. So when I do I did a thing where I was teaching motion, and I did that, and then you can read what I'm talking about, even if it's a lower frame rate. So, but yeah, you're always going to go back and forth, and you just have to decide what kind of content you're doing and whether you need full motion or not. Again, you can also go to a meeting. If the webinar is not that big, you can go to a meeting and use the portal and get everybody 720p. So you have to think about whether it's worth doing webinars if you can't get the quality that you need. Go ahead, Jan, real quick.
I don't know if this is something that we're going to move on, but I have a portal. I bought the portal, and I find that when I look at the statistics, it fluctuates all of the time. John Edelson and I were on it. We were testing it, and it just seems like it's not fixed at 720. It's moving.
Is it on
up and
Wi-Fi
down,
or Ethernet?
The portal is on was wireless.
Yeah, part of the problem. It's just the wireless is not going to be a stable connection. Next question.
Rick Coombs of Columbia, Tennessee says, I was able to fix my camera tearing problem that I posted about yesterday with the Canon Vixia HF G50. I had to go force 1080i interlaced. It is normally 1080p. What is interlaced, and will I notice a quality difference? It is used for streaming, not recording.
Go ahead, Bill.
So interlace is basically this. In
Really
broadcast,
fast. Really fast.
Broadcast TV, because they didn't have bandwidth, they had to draw lines 1, 3, 5, 7, 9, then come back to the top and draw in 2, 3, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. That is interlaced video. It's progressive lines. The problem comes that it takes longer to draw a progressive raster 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 than it does that interlace. So you get tearing if there's motion and things like that, or offsets. So interlace dynamics
with the Vixia camera, or with the Canon camera specifically, what it is that when you switch to progressive, it's doing what we call PSF, progressive sequence framed or whatever. Anyway, it's something that Sony built, and when it's coming into your capture card, it's not reading that correctly, and so it's basically using interlace to create progressive, and then not being managed properly down the path, whereas the interlace is being managed. And so what you need is something that's going to convert PSF to P, and if you did that, you'd end up with clean frames, and that's something like a decimator, which is like $300. Next question.
Stevie Navarro is in with Alex. You said there will be a second hour on Playout B. Do you know when?
That's Jonas to tell, and I just have to work out. He had some scheduling stuff, and hopefully next week or the week after. I mean, sometime soon. It's up to him, not me. Next question. I got to keep moving.
Yeah, Marcus I'm sorry, I'm going to mess up your last name. Coming in from Sweden, and I apologize. Suggestions in terms of a budget-friendly tally system that works with Vmix and Companion.
Someone was talking about that recently, but I don't know. Go ahead, Kevin.
I think the one called a Tally Arbiter is pretty good for a lot of systems.
Yeah, I'm not. I only know the hardware ones. I don't know a way to how to tie those ones in. So yeah, next question.
Okay, sorry, I think it's right, Alati, but I apologize for not
keep
getting
moving.
that. Brian,
Run out of time.
Yeah, Brian Stockton of Des Moines, Iowa. Thinking about getting a portal to boost my meetings. Is there a specific one that will give me the bump?
Good guy.
I've tested all of them. They all work. So the 8-inch, the 10-inch, and the Portal Plus all work, as well as the Echo Show 8, the newest one. All of them work.
Next question.
Ernest Floyd of Bastrop, Louisiana. I've got some training I need to do for one of my departments. It'll be in Zoom, and I need to show an old DOS program running on an old XP machine. I can't put the XP on the network. Any ideas on how to show it?
You need VGA to HDMI. Go ahead, Courtney.
Just get a Windows machine and run DOSBox, and it'll just put it in a window, and then you can scale it up then using Vmix or something like that.
If for some reason if it doesn't need something specific from that box, absolutely, that would definitely work. Mickey, did you have a?
Yeah, a VM would work as well, and just make sure it doesn't hook up to the network through your VM software.
Next question.
Marcus Raitalati is back from Sweden. And what main skills should a director of a live show have?
Yeah, go ahead, Roscoe.
Patience, a lot of patience. I mean, you have to have you have to understand people, and you have to understand what motivates people. But when the pressure's there, you just got to let it go. You have to have a real, you can't have a short fuse.
I will say that probably more than most things, a live director has to have more experience than skills. You just can see directors. You're not going to walk into and just be a great director. You'll think that you understand it and you understand all the technology, but I can see the difference between our directors. Whereas, there's ones that can basically cut the show and they're mechanical about it and they kind of keep up. There's ones that start to be able to, anticipate where the show is going to go. And they're gonna be a little bit ahead of that show, and they're gonna be seeing, oh, that person's got this tick right before they start talking, and I'm gonna go over to it, and they understand the run of show, and they're moving that horizon of events away. But our best directors are thinking 4 or 5 shots down, like they're literally going. That you could tell what they're thinking is because you'll hear them talk to the cameras. Okay, I need the jib to start on my mark. Do this thing, and they'll go camera 1, and then they'll have the camera 2 already moving, and they'll hit camera 2, and then they'll see the jib coming down that they already called, and they'll hit that one coming through, and those directors are telling the whole the whole story, and they're 4 or 5 shots, ahead of the thing. And that comes also from rehearsals. It comes from a lot of other things, but there's not that many of them. But that comes from doing 1,000 shows, 2,000 shows, 3,000 shows. Like, it's not, you'll get to a point where you can anticipate in the first, if you work hard at it, maybe the first 20 or 30 shows, but it's less about skill and more about just doing it. And most people who are live directors were vision mixers or technical directors, as we call them in the United States, where they're just cutting the show and listening to a director behind them. So most of them started that way. They don't have to think about that. They just have to know how to cut the board. And then that director behind them spent years just cutting shows, listening to other directors. I mean, that's how this progresses. And when you talk about becoming a director, being a really good director, you're talking years of just doing it, and so Mickey and then Bill.
Yeah, this is very subjective, but I would say like a good sense of taste, of course. But on top of that, like being able to determine what sort of, artistically, what sort of shots or edits would make sense specific for that show that you are working on, and what would most effectively get the message across for that show.
Yeah. Go ahead, Bill. Real quick.
I'd say it comes down to quick mental multitasking. You have to be able to take in a variety of inputs, make a decision, and act on it really quickly.
Yeah, go ahead, Greg.
And for me, it's really a question of feel. It's the difference between tech and feel.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And it gets back to and that feel doesn't come from anything other than doing it. Like it's just, you're not gonna, and so the best thing you can do is try to do as much of it as you can, and that's where, whether you go to school or whether you volunteer for folks or work at a church or work at a, there's all these places that you can go where you're going to get experience every week or every day to go do those things. But you want to go do them because you won't get a sense of it. There's not a skill. There's not a place to learn it as much as there is just an opportunity to do it. Go ahead, Mickey.
And yeah, just on top of that, like I've worked with quite a few directors that have no idea about the tech. They don't know an SDI from an HDMI connector, but they know how to get that feeling across, like what Greg was saying.
I find it funny. These top audio engineers for concerts don't know anything about their mixers. It's really funny to watch. They show up and they go, "Oh, I want this on this." They know they haven't. A lot of them are. I mean, the ones when we run into like doing stuff at like A level shows. The guys are almost all of them are in their 50s and 60s. They haven't changed they haven't learned anything new in 20 years. It feels like they come in there and they with their cigarette and their coffee and they sit there and they just complain about where everything is and tell everyone what they want and how they want it done. And then they walk out and someone else comes in and, their technician, who's usually in his 20s, is sitting there like, wiring it all up and changing it. And we had this one woman that was the engineer for she was in Singapore, and she's just amazing. Like she knew everything about every part of that mixer, but she never actually mixed the shows. She just knew everything about how to get it done for the guy that was putting it together. And I was like, when is she going to get to do it? So I bet she'll be great, but I guess she was in her first 10 years, Go ahead, Greg.
And the other thing is in every place in film, in every place except production, the jobs are so stratified that the mixers just mix. If they have a problem, they throw their hands up and they wait for engineering.
Yeah, absolutely. Roscoe.
I had the opportunity to take a former student and put her in her seat for their first live show just this last semester. And it took her about 4 days to get good on comms. And so talking through comms just automatically is a skill set too.
Someone should put that in our second hour. We should really have I don't know. I think we did it early on, but we should definitely come back to it where we have a conversation about comms, etiquette, and process. I think it would be useful for people. Last question. Oh,
okay. We're up here to.
It's from Adjua.
I'm sorry.
Adjua. Adjua is asking for Model Sample Studio. Adjua, come back next week, and we'll talk about studios because I think that it's a worthwhile conversation, but we need to do a whole hour on it. All right, so now we're shifting gears and we're going to talk about the environment as it pertains to audio. So not as much, and so what a lot of times we've talked about mics, we've talked about preamps, we've talked about compression, we've talked about a lot of other bits and pieces of this. But one of the big things that we skip over that really does limit what we do is the actual environment that we're shooting in. And so, one of the things we want to always think about is, how is that environment affecting my microphone? We think about it when we're thinking about cameras. I think sometimes we have a hard time. In a camera, you'll walk in and you'll go, oh, well, those windows are going to be a big problem, because it's going to be the wrong color light. It's going to be, a bright light behind the person, because we can see it, right? So when we can see it, we're thinking about all of those things all the time. When we walk into an environment for audio, unless you're an audio engineer, a lot of people don't think about it. They're like, well, I'll just, I'm sure the audio will be fine. It's not, when you have big, then for the audio folks here, you can raise your hand anytime you want. I'm just going to riff for a couple minutes while we wait for questions. But the main thing is that you want to think about those hard surfaces. You want to think about the thin surfaces. What can you hear? When I'm a lot of times I try to find a place that we're going to do a recording, and if it's got to have a lot of audio, I want to sit down and work in that room for a day, like on my laptop, just working on things, because I'm listening for what happens in that room, in that space, for that day, or for a couple of hours, or at least around the time that we're doing the event. Because I want to know what it's doing. In addition to the reflections, I want to know, what does the rest of the building do, and what does the outside environment do? Because that also affects, what kind of mics you can use, I don't use a Neumann, even though I own one. I don't use it in the studio because I don't have the right environment for it, and you'll hear all these little weird things in my office if I put it on. And so those are the kind of things that you have to kind of think about when we send out kits. We send out headsets, because it greatly reduces the number of variables that I'm going to have, because as that mic moves away from their mouth, whether it's a lav or it's a shotgun, I'm picking up more of the environment, and so that, so I make a qualitative choice on what that looks like, because I can't control it. Greg, you were going to say something? No?
I'll wait for the questions.
Okay. All right. Yeah. So I think that's the thing that I think is important, though, is a lot of times we skip over this, that we skip over it's all about the mic. It's all about the preamp, the compressors, the processing. And we're not taking into account that the room that we're doing it in, or the space that we're doing it in, has as much impact on it as many of the other items. Go ahead, Courtney, and then Mickey.
Yeah, I was just going to say, in acoustical design, there's two things you think about: is reflection and resonance. And resonance can not only be, standing wave, which is based on reflection, but it can also mean things that vibrate in resonance with the sound. And if you have a music stand that you're using in a voiceover booth, you got to make sure it's made out of thin metal. And most people put carpet on it to kill the reflection, but it also eliminates the resonance, so it's not vibrating with the solid bass notes that are coming out of your mouth. So those are two considerations in all acoustical design. Keep away from parallel walls, and make sure to eliminate standing waves, and eliminate anything that could vibrate in resonance with whatever your sound source is.
Good, Mickey.
And yeah, more than just like the actual room that you're in, you have to take into account as well, like, is your location, say, if you're doing recorded material like interviews or, narratives, you have to take into account where you're located. Like, are you near a hospital, perhaps, with, a lot of ambulances going in and out? Are you near an airport? How far are you from the flight paths? There are a lot of things that you have to think about, like, a lot of times, for some reason, here in the Philippines, people don't take sound mixers out to recce's for films, and you just show up on set. They send you photos of the location, but that doesn't really help out much, because maybe there's a construction site right across the street, which is pretty common here. And on top of that, like, say, this is such a broad topic, like, even when you're talking about sound for live events, like in actual venues, even things like, if it's in an arena and there are plastic chairs versus, chairs with that have padding, that have fabric, that makes a huge difference on how a PA will react to the room, a PA system would react to the room. And like, just to take it to another level as well, not only acoustical, the acoustical elements of the environment, but also RF. RF plays a huge role in productions nowadays. And if you're in a location, say, near, a radio station, that's going to cause havoc on on your wireless. So there's so many layers to talking about environments with regards to sound.
Yeah. Good, Greg.
Let's take it a step deeper. You got to worry about plumbing anywhere in and near your rooms. You have to worry about things like having a very low flow HVAC system. You have to worry about sound isolation. If, from the outside, you have to have very thick walls on the outside. And then you also have to insulate each room, room inside of a room, theoretically, okay, on the inside. So it gets deeper and deeper.
Yeah. Yeah. Go ahead, Bill.
Well, and these are all use cases, right? If you're a professional, and if I'm going to get a call for a voiceover at 2 o'clock or at 3 o'clock Friday afternoon when rush hour is nearby the place, you better have complete isolation or you're going to pick up all that traffic noise and anything. Now, there's another user who might be able to say, yeah, I'm just not going to do this for 3 or 4 hours. I'm going to get up at 10 o'clock tonight. I'm going to go in the coat closet in my apartment that's full of coats, and I'm going to knock out a voiceover in 15 minutes. That can work successfully well. You don't have to have this. But if you're going to be a professional and you want to be able to take the call, get the job done, that's when a tool like a dedicated voice booth that's been tuned up correctly and doesn't have these problems is worth its weight in gold, because I can turn that around in a half an hour and get it off to somebody right. And I don't have to wait for the circumstances to be right.
And when we kind of talk about studios and so on and so forth, that's one of the big things is for instance, are you going to, there's, and I think one of the things, there's diffusion, diffusing the sound and confusing it. And then there's also the other challenge that you get into is isolating, and they're very different. A lot of people think, oh, I'm going to throw some sonics on the wall, and that's going to get rid of the exterior sound, and that's not going to have any effect on that. It's just going to have the effect on the reflections inside of the system. And a lot of times it's as simple as, I've had folks that just said their room sounds really echoey, and I just said, hey, do you have a coat rack? And they did. And I was like, can you just throw a blanket over the coat rack and put it on the other side of your mic? They just had a mic, they had a camera, whatever, went away. Because what we did is we created something that was going to suck up most of the audio coming out of them. It just stopped on the other side of the mic, so it didn't bounce this way and then back into the mic, and so you're trying to figure out a way to disrupt those sound waves. Now, when we talk about isolation, we're really talking oftentimes about either thick walls or floating. And floating is basically a vacuum that we create around the room. So that's what Greg was alluding to, of building a room inside of a room. You float the room, and what you're doing is creating anything that's going to vibrate. You want to have things. You want to have an air pocket, and the larger that air pocket is, the lower the frequency that it'll block. So if you have a little bit of an air pocket, a lot of your high frequency stuff will get pulled out, but big bass notes coming through, if someone pounding on something will come through. As you thicken that, it gets to a point where it's not practical. But as you start to thicken, create that air gap, and then the other thing you have to be careful of is, what do you create that air gap with? I mean, you're floating it, but it still has to have structure. So, you're basically putting padding, and there's this rubber that you can get for it that you're putting between all of your beams, your wood, so that it doesn't rattle through it, right? Because it'll vibrate the wood. And then a lot of times we've had ones where we lead line them, on the inside, which is going to be another layer of just stopping stuff, going through. And when you start doing those kinds of things, you can be in a pretty loud, and, you walk outside and it's loud, and you walk in there and it's dead, and so it can be done, but at what expense is always the question. Go ahead, Marty.
So context is important. I hear people, when I'm talking with clients about their rooms and their environments, they might say, well, we're not a broadcast studio, or we're not a concert venue, but acoustics are acoustics. And whether you're in a soundstage and have 4 or 5 people around a conference table doing a broadcast, the reflectivity off of that table itself, if people are sitting opposite each other, can cause a bleed from one microphone to another and cause phase cancellations. If you're in a church that has very reflective rooms, that can cause slap back to the stage. And that's the same in a concert venue, in any kind of room. And so you want to, when you, especially when you're in a live setting with loudspeakers, the loudspeakers and the acoustics of the room are inextricably tied together. You can take one pair of speakers, a single speaker, play something in one room, take it to another room, and it might sound completely different because of the acoustics of the room. When you have a very reverberant room, you might find, if you play certain material and you walk around the room, you might find that there will be zones in the room that sound different. If you're close to the speakers, you'll hear the direct sound of the speaker primarily. If you move to the middle of the room, a little farther away from the speakers, what you're hearing is a mix of the direct sound and the reverberant sound of the room. If you go to the back of the room, now you're in an area where you're hearing primarily the reverberant sound of the room and a lot less of the direct sound from the speakers. And so now you're setting up a situation, you have a situation where your audience, depending on where they are in the room, are hearing completely different things.
Yeah, and what's interesting is you see some perfect examples. I think in the Capitol, and I can't remember what room it is, but in the Capitol building in DC, there's a place where if you stand on one side of the room and speak at a normal voice, on the other side of the room, you can completely hear that person talking. And it's perfectly clear because of the curved nature. It just there happens to be a place where that reflection works perfectly, and so you have to kind of take a lot of those into account. Go ahead, Marty, and then Jan.
So yes, so actually what you're talking about, Alex, is this kind of situation. If you've ever been in Grand Central Station in New York or many other railroad stations, you'll see a domed ceiling like this. And actually what's happening is that the reflections, and this is the same like for a band shell where the conductor stands, the reflections off that curved surface focus on a single point. So when you're in a band shell and you've got an orchestra playing and behind the orchestra is a curved wall and the ceiling curves up as well, all of those reflections are pointed at the conductor so that they can hear every single thing that's going on.
Next question. Oh, Jan.
Yeah, I just want to clarify something. Today, they have things like a software program called Smart or Meyer. Meyer Sound has something called Space Map, and there's such a thing called steered sound now. So the old days, before they had line array speakers, what people would be hearing different things in different parts of the room. Today now, every seat is exactly the same.
Well, and some of that has Myers. That's a Myers sound. I mean, that's an expensive solution. So some locations have that, but especially on a temporary location, you don't typically have that level of control. I've been in a Meyer system, in 180 speakers, and they actually reproduce the reverberance of the room in the speakers. So when they turn them off, it literally feels like silence that sucks your ears out. But if they, so they can actually, so to your point, Jen, they actually absolutely have that. But that, I would say that's probably the 1% of all the venues out there that have that investment currently.
Actually, that's changing
maybe.
because smart software is only like about $600-700, and that you can deal with that with almost any line array speaker. Now, if they're using conventional speakers, that's a different story, and that's just about you can have different sounds from different parts in the room.
Right.
However, most people now are going to line array speakers.
Mm-hmm. Let's go ahead into the questions. First question.
Okay, we're starting with one from Manfred Ulmer of West Covina, and he says, we had a Wenger isolation booth installed and all the mics sounded awful until the acoustician placed custom fabricated bass traps in the room, which was literally like a miracle. How do you know if you need one? Do you need smart or equivalent, or is it trial and error?
Go ahead, Bill.
Well, It's not necessarily trial and error. A good acoustic practitioner, there is a way to ring out a space, whether it's a voice booth or a room
But
or
that's
whatever.
not really ringing. I don't think that's really ringing out the space as much.
Well, the
That's
point I was talking about
different.
is like using
Yeah,
pink
it's-
noise to get all the frequencies at a consistent level. And then as you move a microphone around, you can find spikes in reverberant places where you get this phase amplification or contraction. So literally, I've been in voice booths where moving the mic 2 feet one direction changed the way it picked things up because of that close reflection set in a voice booth, even with some moderation of baffling in the room. So that's the point, is that there's never one simple solution. And by using some of these technical tools, you can get an idea of what is happening scientifically, as opposed to just trying to listen and tune it up
Good.
based on
Mickey?
your ears.
Mickey?
Yeah, if you saw the photos earlier that Guy was sharing, a lot of those booths are pretty, they look pretty small. And if you look at the ratio of, like, say, the 90-degree corners to the actual, like, floor area, floor space of the room, there's a lot of corners for that tiny room, you know. So you're building up resonance in those corners, and even if if that room is fully treated, you're still gonna get a buildup there, and buildups, as they combine, could arrive at the position of the microphone out of phase with each other and cancel out some frequencies, or build up on other frequencies. And if we also take a look at the amount of glass in those doors, that's a lot of glass for such a small room. And that glass of course will fully, like, reflect the sound back. So it's not really great for recording. Those rooms aren't really great for recording. They're good for, having a nice dense amount of rooms that are semi-isolated from each other, but not great for recording.
I was going to make the same point. Those are isolation rooms, not recording rooms.
Yeah, go ahead. Courtney and then Marty.
And that's precisely what I was going to say. Isolation and acoustic treatment are two different things. And you can have great sound isolation and lousy acoustical treatment, which is what the samples you were showing are, is to keep people who are playing a tuba in one room from being heard, but somebody playing a piccolo in the next room. That's isolation with no consideration of the acoustical sound within the room. So, if you're going to use it for recording, that's a whole nother treatment to do. So those are two different considerations, and don't go for an isolation room if you need something that you're going to record in, because while isolation is good to keep outside sounds from getting into the isolation room, but isolation rooms are usually designed for preventing sound inside the room from getting out.
Good. Marty?
Yeah, that's precisely where I was going. They are primarily isolation rooms, and they are heavily insulated, and they to prevent sound from getting out, but they are also mechanically isolated from the floor that they're sitting on. They're on isolation springs, so the floor inside that booth will be raised off of the floor of the rest of the facility. Now, it's hard to see in those pictures, but you might notice that some of the walls have these tiny hole patterns in them, and that's to allow sound to reduce the surface area of the wall and to let sound go through it and be absorbed by the material inside. Those acoustic absorption materials don't work on all frequencies. If you look at, if you familiarize yourself with spec sheets of various acoustic panels, you'll see that they're more effective in certain frequencies than in other frequencies. And that's dependent on a variety of things, the density of the material, the thickness of the material, and also how they are hung off the surface of a wall. Alex, you were saying that an air gap behind a panel will decrease their effective low frequency absorption, or increase their effective low frequency absorption. So you want to watch what kind of materials and match the kind of materials that you're using against the nature of the sounds that you need to absorb. And you may not want to actually absorb them. Sometimes you want to diffract them, which is a different principle.
Well, and you know, to go back to the question specifically is when you start to treat a room and you handle and you have the more dense, you know, and not very thick sonics or whatever else you're using, it's not affecting large wavelengths. It's affecting short wavelengths. And so what you end up with is an unbalanced absorption. You're absorbing all the high end and none of the low end. So by putting what bass traps do is they're much deeper and they're going to grab on. They're going to when you know, when the bass goes in, it doesn't come back out again, or not as much of it comes out. And you have to get a balanced frequency response, you need both to absorb everything somewhat evenly or somewhat in, or that's what you're trying to even out. And that is what a program like Smart makes easier is to, and we'll see if we can bring those guys on. I'm sure we can get those guys to come on to talk about it, but that's what they're good at, is being able to see you're putting out a signal. It's not ringing the room, but it's putting out a bass signal that you can listen to, and you're seeing when it comes back in, am I getting more bass response or more you know, high end response, et cetera. Next question.
Okay, we're going to move on to JJ McKenna, who is from Santa Venetia. What's the maximum safe length of a 6-channel mic snake in an outdoor installation with respect to environmental induction? He notes he has a church installation where the office is 200 feet away from the front of the sanctuary, where we're forced to hold services nowadays.
Go ahead, Greg.
Okay, well, traditional wisdom would say if you're running mic level signals, about 100 feet. If you're running line level signals, you can go more, 300 or better. So it all depends. If you're connecting mics up to the front of that, I mean, you know, you might, if it's a really high quality cable, Star Quads or something like that, you might be able to squeeze out 200 feet. But it might be just simpler to buy a small little piece like a Zoom H6 or something, and just gain everything up to line level and send it down the 200 feet.
Good. Mickey and then Marty.
Yeah, prior to digital snakes, we've been able to run microphone level 200 meters from stage to front of house, not with no issues, no noise at all. Of course, good cables, good snake.
Good, Marty, and then Chris.
Yeah, we've been able to run analog snakes the length of a football field and, you know, another several hundred yards out to the truck, around a horse track, you know, with 2-conductor phone wire, if we bump it up to line level. But the answer to the question is it depends on the microphone, and it mostly depends on the wire itself, because there are different grades of wire. The shielding will be very important. You can get double shielding or triple shielded wire that will help prevent the intrusion of RF and induction noise. You can get 3-conductor or star quad wire, which will help cancel out common mode signals. Common mode signals is if you have 2 wires in a conductor and noise gets in, whether it be radio or whatever, they get applied on both conductors at the same time in the same phase. And when they get to the balanced input at the mixer, one of them gets inverted, and so they cancel each other out. If you have 4 conductors, it works better. It's more effective.
Good, Chris, and then Bill, and then Jan.
I say this because I've done it in the past, not that it's the best solution, but there are multiple companies that make like a single rack unit that has multiple mic pre's, you know, and I think the question said they had six lines. And I've actually done it where I put mic pre's underneath the stage, dropped all the mics into that, and then pumped it up to line level to run it down the snake back to front of house. And if you have a problem installation, and again, you can spend as much money as you want. Behringer makes one that's like $100, and I'm sure other companies have them that are much more expensive. But get the mic level up to line level individually, send it to front of house, you still get to mix it.
Good, Bill, and then Jan.
Yeah, and it also depends on the environment a little. I did a bunch of shooting in PetSmart. So they used to drive us nuts because between all the motors that were running all the air, or water circulation from the aquarium side and the old grocery store infrastructure with terrible fluorescent lights with bad ballasts, it was an RF nightmare in those things. And if you use anything that wasn't perfectly balanced, you would get all sorts of hums and crackles and nastiness. So horse track outdoors may be a different noise profile than a retail store that might be from an era where they didn't wire things well.
Jan and Courtney.
Yeah, if you really want to make sure you're going to do it right, use an isolated transformer. Of course, that gets a little more expensive. Also, whatever you do, make sure that you have ground lifts on every one of your runs, because if you don't and you got a buzz, you're done.
Courtney.
And one buzz will ruin your production.
Yeah, I agree with that. Make sure you don't have a powered head end and a powered receiver side that are powered off of different legs and different grounds, because you will get ground loops. But it makes, I was going to point out that the cable really makes a lot of the difference. Make sure you get twisted pairs so that each pair of cables and balanced mic lines are twisted around each other. And Star Quad's even better because they're double twisted, 2 pair per leg, each one of them internally twisted. And if you can find something called Royston Shield, EMT used to make that kind of cable. I used to buy it from my boom cables. And it's a spirally, it's not a braided shield like a lot of microphone cables have, which gives you pretty good coverage. But it's a spirally wound copper shield. It's wound one, and then there's another spiral wrapping that goes the opposite direction. So there's two layers of spiral shield that give you 100% coverage against interference from induction when you're running by AC cables. Anything that's going to throw stuff into your mic.
Mickey, and then Marty.
Yeah, if you're gonna purchase this the Snake at the moment, like you probably end up spending less and actually have better fidelity by going maybe get what's the cheapest Behringer with Dante XR18.
I was waiting. I was just waiting. I've been waiting. We were talking through all of this. So I'm sorry. I just wanted to see how long we were going to talk about analog before we got to what I do, which is that I don't run any analog cable over 20 feet. Like just so you know, like as someone, after thousands of shows and just being in different places, like all over the world, I just got to a point where I was like, enough of this craziness. Like there will be an Ethernet cable. And so any long run that I do, like if you say, oh, I'm going to run an analog cable more than 20 feet, I'm like, okay, let's put an Ethernet in. And so, I know that it costs more, but I can tell you, okay, I just want, and I allowed this conversation just to keep rolling through the isolated and the thing and the isolated transformers and the whatever. And it's all like, just use whether you're using the free version that Behringer makes, where they've got you can use, what is that called? Behringer's little, I don't want to pay for Dante thing. They have their own version of it where you have like
AS50 and
they have it. They call it something anyway. They have an S16. The Ultranet, yeah. So there's S16 and then there's S8, and it doesn't work. The problem with that is it doesn't work over a switch, so you have to actually have the Ethernet cable, but otherwise, I just got to tell you, if you're doing an installation, the Dante just, you can run it 2 different directions. You can have a primary and a backup, and you run them out there, and then oh, by the way, you want to run it to something else differently, or you want to add Dante later, or what? I mean, once you add Dante, you are not going to go back to this analog shenanigans. I'm just I'm sorry, but I hate analog cables. Anyway, which is funny that I don't like NDI, because you think it's kind of the same, but so many shows have been ruined by analog cables. So many of my shows have been either affected or ruined by analog cables and RF that I just am so like, I don't want to ever see it again. I'm fine to get from the mic to the first interface that I can get to, but I don't want to see it after that. Anyway, I'll let you guys clean this up. Marty and Greg and Jan, real quick.
Yeah, that's exactly where I was going. If you're already in a facility that already has wire that's already installed and it's not easy to run new cable, then you got to figure out a way to make it work. But
I would still take the Ethernet. I would tie it to the end of the 6 channel and just pull it through. Just get rid of that stuff.
Yeah, we've done that too. But if you're buying cable, if you're planning an installation, by all means, Make it easy on yourself.
Yeah.
You can take two of those Behringer stage boxes. You don't
Yeah.
need a mixer. If
Yeah.
you can take two of those Behringer stage boxes and they'll be a digital snake together.
Yeah. It's magical. Go ahead, Greg.
And the other thing, Alex, is that you can't appreciate your solution without hearing the horror stories as we
I know.
go through
That's why we just kept on talking about all the things, and I was just like, I'm not going to say anything. I'm not going to say anything until we talk about all the things you have to do to make the analog work, or you can put an Ethernet cable in. Go ahead, Jan.
Just real super basic, basic 101. Just make sure that when you're getting your power, you're getting separate power from the lighting side. That's number one.
Dante. Anyway, Mickey.
Yeah, I think like a lot of like a fireworks here when I mentioned Dante, but yeah.
Well, no,
like,
I have to admit that I was just waiting. I was just waiting to see how long we were going to talk about analog before we got to the point where it was like you just put Dante in and then make it go away, or Ravenna, or like whatever it is, just not analog. Like that's the analog is great for that last mile, the last 10 feet, but not anything else, in my opinion.
But yeah, I mean, I've mentioned this in the past. Like you can get analog done nice and clean if you know what you're doing. You don't, mix up unbalanced connections in there and all that. But yeah, if you are purchasing like the cabling brand new, then just go with something digital. But if you already have a snake there handy, then yeah, by all means,
still think about
lay it out.
Still think about it. Think about going digital. All right, next question. We're gonna move on.
Okay, I was just saying at church, so it's great time to pull the snakes. Jason Fitzgerald of New York City is next, and he has a question about remote podcasting. For remote podcast recording specifically, what are some easy tasks for a one-time guest talent to improve their acoustic environment, that don't require too much effort or discomfort on their end?
Go ahead, Roscoe.
Close the windows and move to a closed closet.
Yeah, I mean, go ahead, Courtney.
Pull the drapes, close the drapes. If there are drapes exposing glass windows, close them. Put enough light in there if you need to photograph them, but give them enough light to read by. And if there's any flat parallel walls, send them a sound blanket, a furniture pad that they can hang up on one of the flat parallel walls, and that'll help a great deal.
The thing that, for the most part, like I only included people in my podcast that I thought had good audio. Like I was very would drop people out if they didn't. But the little piles and Paulsons go a long way. Like it's not a huge expense, to a podcast if you're sending it out to someone to have, to send them like something. Just put this in your computer. It's going to clean up a lot of your audio really quickly. And then if you can double end it, so use something like Squadcast or many of these other ones. Double ending means you're going to get a much higher fidelity recording. And then you can do a lot more work to it, if you need to, more bass, more, other things like that. Go ahead, Bill.
And there's also such a thing as a sound gobo, they sometimes call them. It's basically a flat acoustic panel on a stand. It doesn't do a ton of things. It's not going to isolate something. But if you have a bad reflection, if you put a couple of those in a V shape or next to somebody who's podcasting directly into a microphone, and particularly if the mic is a cardioid, not an omni, you'll get, direct voice and less reflection. They can help a little.
As someone who preps, our company preps, 50 to 60 people a month on average. The only thing you're going to, especially for a podcast where someone's not getting paid, the best you're going to do is, for the most part, is maybe send them a microphone. Like that, the chances of getting to do more is low. Marty.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of musical performances from artists who have performed on, like festival types of events, and I'm amazed at what some of these people are doing. I saw one artist who was singing and playing an electric guitar, and as I look at the environment they were in like an empty apartment. Like there was nothing on the shelves, the closets were empty, bare walls, and it sounded horrible. Yeah. If an artist is going to do this kind of thing, it's really important to get yourself set up so that you're presenting your best self, right?
They spend a lot of money on the guitar and on the mic, like people spend money on things and they just don't understand what's important. I think that's the big problem that we get into. my father's a lawyer, and I think he probably spends somewhere between $1,500 and $2,000 on a suit. Like that's kind of like, that's kind of table stakes, for the kind of suit that he wears. And I don't spend that much on a suit because I don't really care. But the issue is that for a lot of folks that are in the same field, you would think that they'd spend that kind of money on how they're showing up for everybody all the time. You're going to spend money on something. These are the things that make more of a difference now, which is why we're talking about it. Next question.
Dave Chalmers of Glasgow, Scotland is up next with, if you're having to monitor on headphones in a gallery, are folks using headphone calibration tools, SonarWorks or ARC, to get the flat response on their headphones?
I don't think a lot of us are doing that. Go ahead, Mickey, and then Greg, and then Roscoe.
Yeah, SonarWorks, I think it's mostly popular for trying to tune a speaker monitoring system to a room. For headphones, there's no real need to do that because the sound isn't interacting with the room that you're in. So I would just use a pair of monitors, headphone monitors that you are by heart, like what its response is like, and just with that alone, when things are too bright, too dull, or too dark sounding. Just learn the headphones that you're listening to.
Good, Greg, and then Roscoe.
Yeah, the only thing I would say is, stay away from these Beats, the Beats type headphones. Anything that's artificially tipped either way. I mean, typically headphones have some kind of scoop in them where they drop the mids, because those are the less pleasant frequencies. But there's a lot of really good headphones that are fairly flat, and so I would stick with a pair. Any kind of reference headphones would probably work well.
And Roscoe, and then Marty.
Yeah, I agree. Mickey nailed it. But also, I have a Phil Collins song that I listen to anytime I have to go into an environment I'm not familiar with. Because
what's the song?
Oh, I have to look it up. It's so weird. I've had it so many years. I don't even know what the name of the song is.
What album is it
look
from?
for it. I don't know. It's an old song. I know what it sounds like, and therefore it calibrates the system for me.
Yeah, that's interesting. Now you're gonna have to tell us what it is.
Second hour.
I have to go find it.
What song do you tune a system to?
Yeah. Marty Atlas.
So I've played with the NX system from Waves, and I've got SonarWorks, and I'm playing around with them. I've tried them out, and the jury's still out. What they're intended to do is to correct or flatten out the frequency response of each of the different models and brands of headsets. And they're very, very specific. You've got to be sure that whatever system you're using has that profile for that specific model of headphones. And then it's still only generalized, because even though they're mass produced, two different headphones of the same model may sound a little bit different in certain frequency ranges. But for years and years and years and years, what engineers did who worked in the field was they had a mental profile of the headphones that they're using, and might even use a specific pair of headphones based on what they're working on, what they're recording. And the way you do that is to listen to what you've recorded later on a pair of loudspeakers that you also are very familiar with, and see what the differences are. What are the differences that you've noticed? Where if you're recording speech, is the vocal present? Does it have an airy quality to it? Is there too much low end? Is it raspy? Is it sibilant? What's the background noise like? And did you hear that in your headphones? And that's how you get to learn the profile of your headphones.
Bill, and then Courtney.
So, and also I think it's horses for courses, because I noticed he said headphones in a gallery. So I wonder if he's thinking about Zoom the way we sometimes wear headphones and not. And so the monitoring task is important. If I'm doing the voice checks because Mickey isn't here, I'm definitely grabbing a set of headphones because I want full range report back to me about what everybody sounds like. But when I'm on the panel, I'm just using a little security earbud that is not full range because I'm just looking to understand the conversation. So what are you doing? That's important.
Courtney?
Exactly. It depends. If you're monitoring, if you're mixing music, obviously you want to monitor in stereo. If you're mixing dialogue on location, I always suggest mixing in mono. If you have over-the-ear headphones like the Sony's, and always monitor in mono, because that's the track basically you're getting, and your brain has a tendency to filter out things that come from certain different directions. And so you're not going to get a true representation of what that mono recording is going to sound like if you're listening on stereo headphones. So, because your brain filters out stuff based on direction. So monitor in mono if you're doing dialogue, stereo if you're doing music, and one ear if you're on the gallery.
I was talking to an audio engineer, and the most interesting thing that, for some reason, when you're saying that, one of the most interesting things he said was that your brain decides where the sound's coming from based on time, not on volume. And so it's a micro amount of time, like it's that you can hear something louder, but it'll decide where it is based on which ear hears it first. And it makes that decision. Roscoe, before we go on, did you figure out the song?
Yes, it's Paradise.
Paradise? What album is that from?
Paradise. Okay. I'll have to look it up. I'll play it.
That's interesting.
Maybe it's not Phil Collins, but I have it labeled Phil Collins - Paradise.
Oh. Okay, very good. All right, next question.
Moving on to Henry Ramos in Yonkers, New York. And Henry asks, a basic explanation, please, the purpose of white and pink noise.
Go ahead, Marty.
Okay, so they're both types of noise, and one is equal energy over the frequency range. The other is equal voltage over the frequency range. And they're used in different applications. You use pink noise if you're measuring an acoustic space through loudspeakers. You use white noise if you're doing electrical measurement over wire or anything else. The difference is energy versus voltage.
And it gives you a flat response that you can look at. You can see what's going on because it's not just a single tone. You can push tone, you can push a 1K tone over it, but it would only tell you what the room's doing at 1K, as opposed to, being able to see what the room is doing across all of the frequencies or many of the frequencies, without killing everybody by giving them a really loud 12K or 10K or something like that. All right, next question.
Dave Chalmers of Glasgow, Scotland. When asking folks to do remote voiceovers, do you send out a portable mic shield like the Aston Halo, or get folks to do it yourself?
Go ahead, Bill.
I'm bereft at those little shieldy things, because people buy them thinking that they will actually cut down return noise, and they generally do a very poor job at that. They're a one-trick pony, a very narrow one-trick pony, and they do that trick well, but they are not an isolation thing for a microphone. So I've never owned, after all these years of voiceovers, 35 years, I've never owned any kind of shield to put behind the mic. Now, normally I've had a voice booth, but maybe Greg has something that he uses it for that has value. I have not found anything so far.
Go ahead, Greg.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes if I get kind of frustrated with things, and I want something to throw around, it's kind of a convenient shape, and it really makes some good noises when you whip it, but other than that, Bill's absolutely correct. To me, it has like zero value. You have to look at the physics of the situation. The open part of the mic is facing behind you. That's where you want your dampening, behind you. There's nothing. It's the same principle that people will put a voiceover artist into a corner, and they'll be speaking into a corner, figuring that that's going to help them. And it's not. You want the opposite. You want them speaking out into the room is really what you want, because that side of the mic is dead.
Mickey?
Yeah, exactly. In the past year, I've had to deal with some VO artists that have been recording at home, and some of them have these shields, and you get funky reflections from them. And like companies like I think it was Slate Digital or Townsend Labs, I forgot, who actually released a plugin that will de-shield it because of the strange delays and reflections that you get with those kinds of shields.
Oh, that's funny.
One question I have that I thought of while we were talking that I just don't know is, so one of the things you can do is you can gather an impulse from a room. You pop a balloon, in a room, and you get an impulse. I mean, it's more complicated than that, but can you reverse engineer that where you could get an impulse from a room and use that to correct the mic? So you can, is there a plugin that lets you say, I'm going to take the impulse that I took of that room? Like, should I send out a kit? The question is, could I send out a kit and to tell the person at the beginning of the shoot, put up a color card so I have the color for the camera, now pop this balloon, and then just pop it, and I have like a sample of the reverberance of the room? And then is there a plugin that I can put it in and have it reverse engineer that impulse? Would the, like Logic has an impulse one where you can add it. Can I pull it into the negatives, I guess is the question. Go ahead, Marty.
Yes, actually you can. It's impulse response. You can do impulse response analysis with the free analyzer REW, Room EQ Wizard. I believe Smart will do it, and some others as well.
There's an impulse.
But then you need to have the equalizer or the processing at that end to make those adjustments on.
Well, my question is though, is could I do it if I'm doing a recording? If I'm going to have them record, I could bring it back, and if I had that impulse, I could theoretically put it into post and remove some of the echo or some of the other things that I'm doing from that impulse. It's just a thought. Bill, and then Courtney, then Mickey, then Chris.
There's actually a really simple technique that I use whenever I have to record a voiceover in a room that I'm not used to and I don't know what's going on. I do a test recording and then I bring it back and I put it in Final Cut Pro 10, but you can do it in any sound thing. And then you put in a channel EQ, you narrow the Q of the frequency you're looking at, you raise it all the way to the top, and you scan through the frequencies of the track, and you will find all sorts of places where it just goes horrible. Sounds terrible. Rings, standing waves, all sorts of things. And then I can notch those out because there's a sound I do not want in my recording of that room with this microphone in this position.
I'm trying to find something that's more automatic. You can color correct something, but you put a color card in front of it and it's a lot easier. Courtney, and then Mickey.
Yeah, I mean, that technique of a pulse recording is how digitally modeled reverbs work, you know, because, they record the environment and then recreate it. But you can do it in reverse, like you say, and then to try and remove. But the model would have to be based on that specific mic position in that specific room.
No, I think that I'm going to try it because my house is very reverberant, and my thought is that you try it where you have the person right before they start doing whatever they're going to do, just hold out the balloon and pop it, and we just the mic gets what it gets, and then you make the correction. Go ahead, Mickey.
But I would worry because I don't think a pop is very broadband. I think that's a pretty narrow.
It's a pretty. I mean, so I don't know all the details, but I've done a little research on it, and that's what they're doing is they're popping these balloons to get the impulse. Go ahead, Mickey, and then Chris.
Yeah, usually those impulses are processed through a convolution reverb.
Yep.
And I find that the most accurate way to get the sample would be using a sine sweep in the room. And yes, you could do a negative, like a reverse convolution reverb, I guess, to get rid of the processing. But as Courtney mentioned, it has to be exactly same mic, same position of both the microphone and also of the a source of the principal sound. And for me, like when I'm doing post, it's too much work to get to process those individual impulses when I have just the noiser and my inserts anyway, and it's so much quicker to get to that than get a sample.
Right. Chris?
Yeah, to make the package easier to send, I would recommend sending the balloon deflated. And I want to point out, I held up my hand just for that stupid joke.
Okay, next
you
question.
Send compressed air with it?
By the way,
like the huff and puff.
One of the funny things is that I don't know if anybody else does this, but you'll always notice if I walk into a new room that I'm going to have to do a live event, you'll always hear me clicking. So I do this. You'll see me always sitting there talking and going, and I know exactly what that sounds like. So you'll see me do this all the time as I'm walking through a room. I'll just be walking through anywhere I'm doing a recce. I'll do this sometimes, but I've gotten really good at this little click that just tells me, and I can tell you what, oh, this is a live room or not a live room just by clicking, and I feel like a bat, but I just kind of I do the bat thing, and one of the clients said, I walked into the room and I'd done a bunch of work with them, and they looked at me and they just looked at me for a second. And I was looking at them. I was like trying to figure out what they're going to say, and they're like, "When are you going to do the bat?" I didn't even notice that they were noticing like that I was doing it, but they're like, "When are you going to do the bat?" And I was like, "We're waiting for the bat." And I was like, "Okay." Anyway, if you ride a horse when you're young, you get really good at that sound. Next question.
A. Mitchell's in Washington. At Jan Landy, are you finding that given the lower cost of smaller boxes, some and even more places are considering spending money more on systems like Myers or the Yamaha AFC or L Acoustics LISA immersive sound systems instead of the bigger and bigger arrays? If the same $100,000 US can buy either.
Jan's not here anymore. I think that right now we haven't seen a lot of people spending money on that kind of thing right now because they're not sure when they'll recoup it. I think that's the big problem with big. We're seeing a lot of the facilities that we were talking about doing events with. They're about to invest in a lot of different things, whether it's projection or whatever. They're all waiting for timing. When are they going to actually be able to turn it back on again because they don't want to put it on overhead until they can pay for it. So we haven't seen a lot of movement. Next question.
Mark Hadley in Seattle. As far as reflections go, what should I worry about when placing a microphone in front of a monitor? Should the monitor be small, not large?
Go ahead, Roscoe.
And just don't make sure that the reflection goes away from the microphone that's right in front of it. So don't have the monitor perfectly perpendicular to the microphone.
Yeah, go ahead, Mickey.
And that's why, like on ADR stages, on larger ADR stages, we have instead of using a smaller monitor up close, we usually have a bigger one further away, or if the space permits, have a screen like 10-15 feet away and project the image onto that instead of flat surface.
Bill?
And cardioid patterns are your friend. You don't want an Omni if you're having sound coming from a close reflector right behind the mic. Cardioid keeps things on the front.
Good, Marty.
The angle of reflection equals the angle of incidence. So think about a billiard ball on a pool table. And so that would be how you direct reflections away from places where you don't want them. And for cardioid microphones, if you look at the polar pattern of that microphone, you'll find out what angle will give you the maximum rejection behind the microphone, at what angle. And yes, they do have a point. The larger the surface, the more reflection energy that you'll have. So smaller monitors are better, but there's a point of diminishing returns there, right?
Yep. Next question.
A Studio 891 from Mexico is in with, what about NDI audio? Pretty big topic.
It's kind of different than the environment. I know we talked a lot about Dante, so I think this question probably came up when we were talking about Dante, but if I had choice between Dante and NDI audio, I would definitely choose Dante. NDI has its own challenges. Again, it's useful for a lot of folks, but I wouldn't build a facility around it for audio. It's not its area of strength. Convenience is the area of strength for NDI, and it's really powerful in the cloud. And it can be well managed in a space as well, but I don't think I would make it part of my audio backchain, given the experiences that we've even had in this group. Doesn't have me feel more secure of using it. Go ahead, Marty.
Yeah, I've got a situation right now. When I was setting up for this morning, I have NDI on 2 of my computers, and the main computer that I'm using, I set up a screen capture, and on the same computer, I can't pick up that video. It's just not there, but it can pick up video from the other computer. I don't know what's going on. So NDI is a little iffy.
it'll last us until 2110 becomes more normal, and then after that, we'll just use 2110, in my opinion. Next question.
It's Dave Chalmers, and it's for Alex specifically. He wants to check out your opinion on the Isotope D-Reverb plugin, and he has a link to it.
I have not used it, so I will. Marty, it works well.
Yeah, it does. You have to have some part of the recording that is just room ambience. Or if you've got a really long room, you can use a tail. But yeah, I've taken audio that was in a very reverberant church, and I had it's just a solo singer, and I was using hung microphones because they were standing out in the middle of the room. So I was using the audience mics to pick them up, and it was very reverberant. But I used this D-Reverb, and it just cleaned it right up. It was amazing.
Yeah, what I find interesting is there's an NPR, some NPR segment or whatever about the fact that a lot of the chants that we think of as chants and we record them in a studio only really work the way they were designed in the church that they were created in, because they were actually, the length of the chant and everything else was based on the reverberance of the church. And so the cathedral would bounce the audio around and bring it back in and do the circular. And that's actually where I learned about impulse stuff a little late, but was the fact that they're now taking these impulses of these cathedrals to reproduce the sound of these chants. But they said that when you're in the church, it's a completely different sound because of the but literally you go to a different cathedral, it won't sound the same as it did there. Go ahead, Bill, and then Greg.
So for everybody doing both video and audio recording here, there's two words you really have to know if you want to make this part of life easier. That is room tone. And it is a process of capturing the way the room sounds without people talking in it or whatever. On every video shoot I've ever done as a professional recordist, at some point, either at the beginning, middle, or end on a break or something like that, you just stop everybody, have them be quiet, and just run some sound of the room itself. And you can use that for a whole bunch of circumstances. And one thing it will do is if there's something that you're going to process like this to take out the sound of the room, which is bad, from a recording, it'll be a huge boon to you to have that clean and not have to go looking for little snippets of it.
Go ahead, Greg.
I'm going to put my head on the chopping block here, and I'm going to say that I have not had very good results with the RX Deverb. I think there's a big difference between the standard and the advanced, and I have the standard, so I can't speak to the advanced. But believe me, I have tried plenty of different ways, and it gets rid of a little bit, but you really start getting artifacts quickly. And who knows, maybe it's operator error. I'm certainly open to that. But I just haven't had that much luck with it.
Go ahead, Mickey.
Yeah, I find specifically the RX D-Reverb works okay with the longer reverb tails, but doesn't work well with early reflections. So usually I use a mixture of I'm a big fan of Synaptics Unveil.
Yeah,
I use a mixture of that works really well with dialogue, and also Isotopes D-Reverb. And if you have a lot of quick transients, what seems to work well for me is SPL's Deverb plugin. Yeah. So a mixture, a little bit at a time, as with any noise reduction process. Don't go heavy-handed on a single thing. A little bit of this, a little bit of that, and you will find the combination that works well.
That's great. All right, great discussion. I wasn't sure when I threw it out whether it was going to be a discussion that kept the whole. Oh yeah, Roscoe, did you find out who did it? Is it Phil Collins?
Oh no, it is. Well, we're going to play it in the post show, so I may have it later. No, but can I make a quick point? You guys are all talking about ideal recording conditions, and I've been tossed out of my studio for the semester and have to go on location. So we need to have a whole nother hour on location audio sound.
Yeah. Oh yeah. We'll work on that. I think there's some of us here that know some of that stuff, and I think we can ping somebody to bring some ringers in. So let's think about people we can bring in that are sound recordists for Yeah, I got a couple folks. So some of you also have a lot of
The
experience.
nightmare of wind.
Yeah, exactly. All right. Thank you all. Great questions to the audience. Thank you very much to the participants, and thank you for. Let's go ahead. Fred is looking for the post-show link. By the way, is in every email that you get every morning. It's at the bottom. You have to listen. You have to go all the way to the bottom, and you'll find it. Anyway, so thank you all. We're going to start the post-show now. And we'll have another room for Zoom OSC. If it runs long, we're going to go ahead and let it run a little long. I know that yesterday we cut you off, and that was my rule. TJ was just following orders. So anyway, so we'll go from there. But anyway, so thanks to everybody. Thank you to the, as always, to the great panel and to the great attendees. And we'll see you all tomorrow. All right, take care.